My name is Mark Simos. I'm in the Enterprise Cybersecurity Group. I focus on strategy and offerings, and how do we bring all of the amazing capabilities that Microsoft is building in all the various pieces and put them together into customer strategies that fit the initiatives that our customers are working on and answer the questions that they need answered.
I'm Mike Miller. I'm an Office 365 guy, a little more Exchange focused and SharePoint focused, which is a good question. How many people here have Office 365 today? Okay.
Cool.
How many people in the room are security professionals or have cyber or security in your title?
A few folks.
Okay, now, how many of you that raised your hands that are cybersecurity professionals are female? Is there anyone?
We got one.
Okay.
Two. Sweet.
Two? Okay, oh, we have a problem. Okay, how far away did you come to get here? DC. Oh, come on down. You win a prize.
So actually,
there may be more prizes. You might want to pay attention.
He's the prize guy. I don't know. So I actually have a couple of questions. For those of you that have Office 365, how many of you started with Exchange Online? Okay, most of the room. How far are you on Exchange Online? Are you 0 to 50% or 50 to 100%? 0 to 50? Okay. And how many 50 to 100% are your users? Okay, so most of you folks are towards the end of it. Okay. I don't have a prize, sorry.
How many people are using federated credentials with their Office 365 tenant? Let's say it looks like a little more than half. And in enterprise customers, that's pretty common.
But
across the platform, we see customers that use a lot of either just native cloud accounts or the password sync capability.
Yep.
Which you've probably heard about today if you didn't know about it.
Cool.
I've got another prize.
You got another prize?
Yeah.
I'm not going to stand in your way.
Okay. Who thinks they have the largest tenant in the room? Over 100,000? 50,000? Who has the smallest tenant in the room? Who has only one user in their production, not test, production tenant? How many? Who has one? No, it doesn't count. Who has one? Do we have somebody with one? Okay. You get a prize.
All right, I think we're done with prizes.
Okay.
So today what we're going to be talking about is one particular scenario, because one of the things that Mike and I have done is we've done a number of assessments of organizations and their security posture against the threats that we typically see, both against directly Office 365 as well as those that impact Office 365 by compromising the on-prem environments, and helping assess these customers and understand against those risks as well as just the general security best practices. And so we've been focusing, and we've been also working with our content folks to help write guidance and content and references. One of which is this document that's linked there. All these slides are going to be posted on the Ignite site and apps and all the other various ways you can get it. And of those scenarios, the simplify, protect access, allow collaboration while preventing leaks, stop external threats, staying compliant. Securing admin access is the one that we find is the one that's most frequently the highest impact and the one that we worry about the most based on the attack activity that we've seen. And so there's a whole poster that does, I think it's like a 5x20 chart with all the various different things that you should think about as you secure your Office 365, broken into those 5 scenarios. And the one that we're going to be focusing on the most today, and the demos will be focused on, is the validating and monitoring your security configuration, because that's the low-hanging fruit for an adversary to take over the entire tenant in one fell swoop and take control of all of the data in it, as opposed to one at a time. Now, if you have one user in your tenant, one user versus all data, it's the same thing. But for the rest of us, there is absolutely a lot more to be gained by taking over the admin than there is to be gained by taking over one user. So let's start with the mind of the attacker. How many people here think we're still dealing with hobbyists for attackers? Okay, good. We're past that. Awesome. What we see is that the attack environment is very much a profession. It's got a very rich marketplace, and we see a lot of different opportunities for these adversaries to do their thing. And so we spent a little bit of time putting together kind of the types of things that would be top of mind for an attacker that we're facing today. So these guys can steal and exploit data, right? I need this particular data, I'm going to go through the whole attack chain. They might steal data and then find a buyer for it, sell it to them. They might be selling attack tools. Most of the people that made the most amount of money during the gold rush in the US in the 1840s were the people that actually sold picks and mining equipment to the miners. It wasn't actually the people that were mining the gold. And we're seeing the same dynamic happen in the attack environment, where there's some people that say, you know what, I'm not doing anything illegal. I'm just selling tools, and let the other guys that do the attacks take the risk. We're seeing that. And we're starting to see, and this is the one that's the most disturbing, as different organizations are attacked through different ways, whether it's a run-of-the-mill botnet, a commercial botnet that anyone that clicks on a random phishing mail can get their computer opted into. We're starting to see people realize that the host that they've compromised might happen to be in a very large bank. And while they don't know how to monetize that, someone else is willing to pay them for control of that already compromised host. And so we're seeing some interesting dynamics as there's a lot of resellers out there in the dark marketplace. So we wanted to kind of give you guys a little bit of a sense of that. Motivations, really three different ones. Pure money, profit, whether it's as one of these smaller market ones, whether it's someone that's, or it could be just a criminal organization that really has the end-to-end process on how they're going to monetize credit card data, or a financial transaction like redirecting a wire transfer to their account, et cetera. Message. So this is where Anonymous and the other hacktivist group come in. They're trying to make a point, and I talked to some customers actually this week that were being targeted by some activist attackers and having to deal with that. And then a mission or a nation state. Some of them work for a government, and their job is to compromise these environments. That's what they're supposed to do. Whether they're enlisted in a military organization that does hacking, or a civilian government agency, or somewhere in the gray spot in between them and private industry. There's certain countries where it's really hard to tell where these people work, quite frankly. And then when you look at their technical objectives, their job is to get in, and they want to do it reliably, get the data that they're assigned or can sell. Most of the cases is data theft in some form or function. But occasionally we do see destruction as a motivation. Everybody's heard of a certain electronics company that got hit pretty hard. But those are very rare. They're very high profile when they happen, but they're very rare. Most of the time they're out to steal data in the form of documents or any other different things. And then, of course, they want to avoid detection. Because if I'm in there, I'm attacking an environment, I don't want to have to deal with some defender getting in my way and messing me up and slowing me down to get my data. So that's really what the adversaries are after. And at the same time, if I can still get the data even though I got detected, I still accomplish my mission. It's just a higher cost. And so a lot of these guys, some of them will move to the next target, some of them will stay on that target because that's their assignment. It varies. And then some of the daily considerations, just to kind of give you an illustration. Some of them build their own tools, some of them buy tools. Some of them use malware, and you can detect them with all the conventional malware techniques, or some unconventional ones that we've had to come up with as a exploit PowerShell, and WMI and others. And some of them live off the land. Some of them actually don't have any permanent implants. They use credentials, and they just operate off of those. And if you've got sysinternals installed, great, I'll just use that tool because I can use a PS exec, and I don't have to bring my own copy. So that's just some of the dynamics. Does that sort of make sense to everyone? Kind of give you a picture inside their thinking? Cool. So now let's take a look at the impact on IT security of what's happening. First of all, the purpose of IT security is to protect business value running on hosts that are connected to networks. That is ultimately what IT security is about. And in the old days, before cloud, It was corporate data, apps, and services that lived on hosts that IT managed, sometimes well, sometimes not, connected to networks that IT managed. So we had the full stack of control. We built castle walls around them, had firewalls. Life was good from an IT security guy perspective. And then we had this sort of thing that happened in the past 5 to 10 years. A couple elements of it. One is that our businesses are starting to make money by putting their data at more risk and or connecting to all these other organizations. We have this thing called digital transformation as people modernize their businesses to embrace the power of the cloud and analytics and all the wondrous things that it brings and the insight, amazing amounts of stuff that allow a lot of business opportunity to bring value to customers and make money. And a lot of those things involve doing things that absolutely change how the IT operations run. Hosts are no longer controlled. They're bring your own devices, they're cloud services, they're a mix of all sorts of different things that every enterprise has to manage. And of course, the networks could be all the way to the open internet or virtual networks on the cloud. So as we move into this space, and especially when you talk about Office 365, which everyone in this room is on, this is something that your firewalls don't stretch up there. So what we found is that identity becomes your primary security perimeter. And this security perimeter is woven throughout all the various BYOD devices or semi-managed devices or even corporate devices that are constantly clicking on phishing emails, as well as through the cloud services and all that. And so just to kind of establish a little bit of a philosophical baseline, that's really what we're seeing is happening in the security world. And when we pull it all together, and we're going to dive into the weeds and the PowerShell demos and all that in a couple of slides here. But the way that we are guiding organizations as they go through this journey is we have this notion that we call a secure modern enterprise. And what this is really about is aligning the organization to a couple of North Stars, if you can have 2 North Stars, which is the business objectives and the threat environment. Those are the 2 things by which IT security should really be measured. This is the high watermark they should achieve. And identity as a security perimeter is the top one. Apps and data is another part of your environment, and you're really looking to align those to the business. Infrastructure is really about embracing the cloud, not only because the cloud allows you to check on hygiene. How many folks here saw Azure Security Center? Okay, so one thing to check out if you have any touch with servers, Azure Security Center has some great stuff that you just turn on if you've put your machines in Azure that allows you to see if your network is misconfigured, if you're missing a web app firewall, or any of the key normal security things. A baseline is missing, patches are missing, anti-malware out of date. So we see cloud as really the future of infrastructure as well, not only from that perspective, but also the ability to detect attacks. And then devices, obviously your devices are your front line. They're the ones accessing the data, your users are logging into them. So that's a key piece of it. And when we talk about how do you form a strategy to deal with all this stuff, your absolute #1 thing to think about is how do we raise attacker costs? The reason we spent so much time on the mindset of the attacker is we want you to understand how they think, how they work. Because everything you do in security and whether or not it's going to have value should be measured against, am I raising the cost to attack me? Am I making it hard for the adversary to attack me? Because if they're absolutely after me, I got to raise their cost so they get less for the amount of money they spend on me, and time and effort and energy. And if they're just looking for an opportunity, if I make my wall a little higher, they'll go to my neighbor. So you absolutely have to measure everything you do against the cost of attack. Will this make it harder to attack me in real world? And the way that we do this is we focus on 2 things. One, we want to break the known attack playbook. If we've seen it in the wild, if it's something that's out there, if it's something that's been done as opposed to a theory or something we imagined, that is one of your top 2 priorities. The other, rapid response and recovery. You have to be able to see these things happen, you have to detect them, and you have to respond to them. And you have to clean them up quickly, because that's what adds adversary cost. It resets them back to 0. This changes the classic age-old dilemma. How many folks have ever heard a security person say, well, if we make one mistake, it's all game over? Guys all heard that? Okay, you don't hang out with no security guys. We're very defeatist. But ultimately, that is what we call the defender's dilemma, is if you go through all of this stuff, but you leave one hole, the bad guy gets in, right? And that's a big part of what IT security faces. When you put these two things together, you start reversing that and making it an attacker's dilemma. Because if it's everything that they know is blocked, and if they try something new and you have good detection and response on it, everything new that they try is quickly blocked. You're creating an attacker's dilemma that every time they get detected, that stops working on all of their targets. So that's how you change that formula upside down and bring that cost very high to the adversary. And of course, other attack vectors. You always want to be thinking about the other things, but if you haven't seen it in the wild and it doesn't have to do with detection and you respond to them, it's generally a lower priority than those two things. So when we look at cloud services, and Office 365 is squarely in the SaaS column there, there's a certain set of things that are always a customer responsibility. Your identities, your data, and your clients. A cloud service cannot secure those for you. You have to secure those things, and you have to train your users so that they understand that. So a certain set of things that every cloud service automatically takes off your plate, which is I don't have to deal with the physical stuff. I don't have to establish power ping and pipe. I don't have to secure my power ping and pipe. I don't have to deal with any of that because the cloud service provider is dealing with that. I still have to secure the clients connecting to it. And then, of course, depending on the service type, in this case SaaS, we like SaaS best. From a security standpoint, purely from a security standpoint, we like SaaS best because it's something off the shelf, assuming you trust the provider. Got to trust Microsoft. Assuming you trust the provider, you want to dump as much responsibility on them on a per workload basis as you can. So you don't have to run a server. You don't have to manage code. If someone else is able to do that and they have something off the shelf that works, that is the best option, period. Because you have the least amount of things to secure, and most of them are pretty close to the business importance that you have to deal with. So as we look at the regular attacks, these are the things that we see in most cases. When I'm an adversary, I have a couple of different choices on how I'm going to attack you if I want the data that's sitting in your tenant or in your environment as a whole. If I am willing to, I can enter your environment, navigate around it, and probably get a hold of everything. How many folks here have heard pass the hash? Credential theft? Yep, good. This is that attack profile. And this is, I'm willing to go ahead and navigate your environment, risk detection, go through all that stuff. And the benefits for me to do that, which is why we see this the most, is I can hit anybody and I can get all your data. That's generally the pattern. We have a whole set of mitigations. I actually talked on this morning. And you can look for that talk if you're interested in it. But ultimately, this is the typical piece. And Microsoft has put a lot of investment into helping organizations protect against each stage of this and break this kill chain. So there's a lot of different capabilities there. Most of them are technology. The one that really stands out is that top right corner there, 3A. There are certain problems that an adversary exploits, and this is very, very much paralleled in Office 365 and what we see in the attacks directly on there as well, that are not actually technical problems. They're actually people-process problems. How many folks have heard people-process technology preached to them by some vendor or someone in their organization? Come on, I need to see more hands than that. All right, you've all heard people-process technology. That top right corner is where the people process are the biggest part of the vulnerability. Because where an admin decides to use their credentials is a choice that they make. Whether it's a person choice or it's a process that they're following, where they decide to use those credentials, the ones that administer their Office 365 tenant or Active Directory or anything else, that choice creates risk. And whether or not you have risk depends on where they log in with those credentials. So the fix for that is actually something that we actually lead with guidance and documentation, and of course professional services to help customers implement it. That is a very unique, interesting problem that we're seeing as the adversaries that go down this path go there. Continuing on. If I'm willing, and this is a very small percentage of what we see, but if I'm willing as an attacker to do the research ahead of time to figure out who has access to the plans for that great new product that hasn't yet released, for that unpatented research. Who is the researcher that's doing that? If I put that investment in, I only have to hit one user. I don't have to go through all that trouble, and I just access the data through that user. We see very few large organized groups going after this because, quite honestly, it's easier to go to the top one and get guaranteed results. But we do see that as well, just a smaller volume. And then there's this array of technologies that you can see that help protect against that. And then the third option that the adversary has is, you know what? I don't want to take over your devices. I don't want to develop malware. All I want is your password. So I'm going to send you a phishing email, and I'm going to redirect you to a site that collects your credentials. And then I'm just going to use those. And we actually do see this, and it does work. So that's the other option that they have. You have a couple different protections on there that can impact that throughout the cycle. Make sense?
And you may be also, just to interject, you might be attacked because you have a relationship with someone or an organization. You know, you may sell phishing lures, but you sell phishing lures to the CIO of some large company that has some IP that the attacker's interested in.
Anybody,
go ahead.
No, anybody remember the RSA hack of about 10 years ago? When they went after the secure ID devices? Do you think they actually cared about the data on RSA server? No, they cared about the defense industrial-based customers, the Department of Defense contractors that RSA tokens were bought by. And so you have this huge supplier problem, the vendor problem. We're seeing law offices targeted that deal with sensitive information, because if you have very sensitive stuff, who always gets access to it? The lawyers, always. And a lot of times it's outside counsel. So we see a lot of that dynamic as well. And so when we look at this from a pure return on investment, what are the things that I have to focus on in Office 365 that are going to get me the most protection against the most damaging attacks that I could deal with? Very simply, tenant admin. Anything that gives you admin of the tenant or of all the users or access to all the users' data is much more important than the rest. With Office 365, you don't have to worry about the service. Microsoft deals with that. We have our own hunting teams. We have our own defense guys. We have monitoring on that. It's scaled beyond imagination on how well they do the automation as well as the security on that. We're actually having an interesting time trying to relate what we have learned and what we do internally, because everything in that system is so automated, to what normal IT enterprise works like, because we never touch a single server manually. Whereas in an IT enterprise, that's a fairly frequent event, even if it's occasional. And so we're having to boil down to principles to make sure we're relating what we learned there to help our customers. But ultimately, we secure that, and you don't have to worry about that. So the key thing that you have control over is that tenant admin that has influence and control over all of the data that the users store. Oops.
Yeah, you can talk about it. You want to set it up?
Yep. Do you want me to talk about the demo, or do you want to sum it up?
No, go ahead and set it up.
Okay.
Then I'll get into it.
So the first demo, so we're gonna do 3 demos, right?
Yeah.
Where we're going to go through and show you what we think, and we're going to share all the scripts. They're in the slides that you can download, and we're also working on posting them out there as well, so you can just download them in script form. They're not that long, where we go through the recommendations that we have for how do you secure your Office 365 tenant. So we're going to do the first demo. We're going to check some of those full tenant impacting or all data impacting areas. Mike's going to go ahead and show those, and then we're going to capture a baseline of that known good configuration, as good as it is at the moment, and snap that so that we can compare it in the future. So Mike, take it away.
How many are comfortable with PowerShell and use it for Office 365 administration on like a daily basis? Looks like about a quarter, okay? There's a lot of things with PowerShell and Office 365 that let you get focused information. Some of the things we're going to talk about today you can get other ways. And we're just illustrating some of these concepts with some code. And what you see on the screen is the PowerShell integrated, I don't know what ISU stands for. You know
I don't know.
But let's start off real simple here. We've got a small piece of code that's going to read the roles from Office 365. First it's going to connect, then it's going to read the roles, and then it's going to iterate through the role members, and it's going to show you who's an admin or has a defined role other than user in your tenant. And if I can type my password,
and if you've never experienced it, typing your password while there's about 300 people watching is actually remarkably difficult. It's very distracting.
so this is the test to see if we see any red. Does anyone know what it means when you see red PowerShell? There's no red yet. Okay, so simple script. We dump the company roles, and let's take a look at this. This is our tenant, and let me zoom up a little bit here. Control. Whoa. Now we see some things we expect. You know, Ignite admin, that's me. There's an MFA version of me. Somebody called Rogue. Well, I don't know what that is. There's a consultant has an address in here. There's a couple security administrators and other roles, and we see some read-only accounts and some DirSync accounts. Okay, this is a little different than the view that you get from the normal admin console. So we might want to check around and see, are these all real administrators?
Because one of the things that we do see quite frequently is how many folks had a project manager that was involved in your Office 365 onboarding? Did they ever have tenant admin? Did you remember to check to make sure that they're not still tenant admin? So this script is to catch those kinds of things. In this particular check, we want to make sure that you know exactly who has this level of impact in your environment. That's really the key piece.
So we talked about admins. Admins are what we do care about, but there's no real good way to hide as an admin, right? You might get away with it for a while, but you might not. And even if you had somebody that still has global admin in your tenant, you may still trust them. It may not be a concern. Mm-hmm. But you also don't know what the hygiene of their passwords are, right? If they use the same password for your tenant that they used for, let's just say, Yahoo, right?
That wouldn't be good.
No, not so much. Okay, so there are other ways to get information out of a mailbox or out of your tenant. And one of the things we look at is, who hasn't logged in a while? And this next command is going to connect to Exchange Online. The first command connected only to the tenant. But this is going to connect to Exchange Online. It's going to run a very simple single-line command to pull the statistics down for who's logged in. So let's go ahead and run that. Okay, let's see if we get some red PowerShell again, or not. Okay, Exchange Online PowerShell has to invoke a module, so that's what you see it doing right now. It's invoking a remote PowerShell module, if you're not familiar with that. If you could step up at the mic, we'll get that on the recording. But yeah, we welcome a question or two. You really should stay for the rest of the presentation. Okay. Pay that. He deserves a T-shirt.
Yeah, he gets a T-shirt for that. Oh, well, you get to choose who to donate the next one to.
That other security professional that is a minority gender in this room might deserve it.
All right.
Anyway.
So, got results?
So what we did here is we just listed our users, and we sorted by the last time they logged into Exchange Online, okay? And a couple things are interesting. I've got a couple accounts here that haven't logged in. I've got an admin account here that logged in a month ago. I've got a couple other accounts. The CEO obviously doesn't work very hard because he hasn't logged in a week. You know, I've got some other accounts, but I don't really pay much attention to user accounts yet. Okay. So let's move on to the next demo. One of the things that is, right now we're talking about things that are good to check, things that are good to do to your tenant. How many of you have users or don't, have protocols enabled, like POP or IMAP, where users don't use those? Okay. It's pretty common. POP and IMAP are on by default. How many people know that a user can PowerShell into your tenant? Some of you may not have known that. Now, they can't do much, right? I can PowerShell into my Microsoft tenant, and the only thing I can see that I can't see any other way is whether I'm on lit hold. And I can count the number of items in my mailbox, which actually is a pretty funny
litigation
thing.
hold for those that aren't familiar with that term. Yep.
So the next set of scripts, part of this has been posted by Roman Zarka on a TechNet blog. Roman's a colleague in my team. The next script we're going to run, I'm going to kind of walk through this. We're going to get all the mailboxes. We're going to connect to the tenant. We're going to get all the mailboxes and put that in a variable. We're then going to run a set cas mailbox command for all users and disable POP. We're going to do the same thing for IMAP. And then a little farther down, we've decided that the CEO, the CIO, the CEO's admin, they don't need PowerShell. And we've run some very simple commands to disable PowerShell for them. Again, this is simple stuff, but it's just the concept, right? The concept that we're thinking about how our users are using the tenant, and we're disabling those things that really just don't need to be open, right? Because that might be something that the attacker takes advantage of to extract information.
Attack surface reduction is how a security guy would hear that. I'm running out of jokes to say so that Mike doesn't have to think about typing his password as he types it. Question?
Yeah, it's habit. I'm not easily trainable, you know. I'm like a user that way. You know, I like doing it the same way every time. I tested this demo before this. You know, I've been testing it all week. And today, it ran 2 out of 3 times. So how many people have seen a failed demo this week? Okay, so simple script. We disable POP IMAP. We disable PowerShell. You might disable other things, but there's impacts with some of those protocols. Disabling Exchange Web Services sounds like something you might want to disable, but then you might find out Skype for Business users can't see advanced presence, right? So things to think about there. So Mark, let's talk about baselines.
Let's talk about baselines.
This is where you talk.
Oh, I talk while you, okay. So how many folks have ever heard a security guy say, we want a baseline configuration of something? An operations guy. So, well, operations guy should also do it. So one of the things that we wanted to put together was all these various pieces that we talked about. Hey, these are all the great things that you can do to measure the security of your tenant. Let's go ahead and see if they change over time. Because, you know, if you review it, you go through and do this, great. Let's make sure we capture the state of that so we can tell if there's been any modification to these interesting things so that we can find that out later and know where it was at that time.
Okay. So the next script I'm going to show you is a script that's going to create a baseline. It's a much more complex script, but it is far from the most complex script I've seen in PowerShell. I can kind of understand it, and I had some help from some of the people in my team. Andrew Piskai and Roman Zarka were kind enough to make some time and create some of the base for this that was used for this demo. This does require a bit of configuration. There is an email address that we're going to use to alert and send out the baseline. There's also let me open it, I forgot to open it. There's a list of mailboxes. Now, Mark, why would we be interested in some mailboxes?
Well, anyone ever heard of, I'm trying to remember what the term that they're using now, but where they essentially fish or whale a CEO to try and convince them to authorize wire transfer? Ever heard of that? Be kind of good to keep an eye on that mailbox to make sure nobody can send email as the CEO, right? Because that would be bad, right, Mike?
Yeah.
So
And,
definitely worthy to watch some of these mailboxes. Go ahead.
What would you call something like that? Would you call that maybe something of value, something of?
I would say that would be a high value asset.
Okay. So I'm not going to go through this script. It's pages and pages long. It is a little more complex. It has some functions in it. But I really haven't had too many problems with this script in debugging this. Most of it's been just look and feel. So let's go ahead and run this. And as somebody pointed out, my credentials are already there. Okay. So the script is going to show some output on first run. It's loading some modules. This is good. I typed my password right. It looks for some state files. We call them the old rules. It's pulling some tenant information. And then it's iterating through the mailboxes, okay? The high value assets that we've listed. You might consider security professionals, admins, also high value mailboxes. And don't underestimate an admin of the CEO who may have equivalent access to what that CEO has.
Yep. And we've even seen in some of the attacks, companies that deal with large transfers for purchasing housing in the US, they do what we call escrow, where there's a lot of wire transfers going on. We've seen them specifically target their users because they are handling so many wire transfers on a daily basis. So we have seen techniques that this is really designed to discover in active practice.
Okay. So the first time this runs, it creates a baseline. So let's go take a look at the baseline. It is in a file on the machine. And if the demo works right, which it looks like it did, you also get an email about the baseline. So let's take a look at some things in the baseline, because just like we looked at some of the discrete things with PowerShell, there's some things in this baseline that are a little bit different. Now, we have our list of admins that we had before. That's good, but we have a record of it. We have a record in email, and it's time-stamped. This is something we didn't have before, but we've got a list of all the delegate permissions on mailboxes. So we say that, if we look at this, the migration service and the Bez admin account have full access to the CEO's mailbox. Now, maybe the Bez admin account legitimately needs it, but it also might be a pretty interesting account. You'll see that, that the CEO has access to the CFO's mailbox. That's interesting. That could be normal, right?
Mm-hmm. And the key to recognize here is the first piece is, we can get you a lot of technical information on who controls what, who can send as, but ultimately these things do have to be interpreted by people that understand the organization, the culture, and the practices. And essentially you get into the risk management thing. Is it okay that 5 people can send email as a CEO? Well, does he have 5 different admins? Some have multiple admins that can do stuff. And so some of these things are risks that are accepted by the organization, but ultimately this is to provide you the data to help with those risk decisions, to understand where there might be risk, because you may find that all of a sudden you thought you had 5 accounts that were high value, but when you find out that there's 15 more that can send as any of those 5 accounts, all of a sudden you just realize your risk profile grew, and you need to watch and be careful of those accounts as well. So really this is about helping you discover those and then capture the baseline to notice if there's a change.
Okay.
Question?
Yes, I was wondering if these scripts that you have just told us about are in Secure Score?
You want to take that one?
The answer is some of the methods are in Secure Score.
Okay.
We're going to talk about Secure Score. We have a slide on it. Secure Score is a really amazing piece of work that I personally learned about 4 days ago.
And Brandon's right there at the mic, so he's going to be talking on that tomorrow, correct?
Tomorrow, either 9 or 11, I can't remember which one, but come hear all about it. Get it booked.
Yeah, if you know about it.
And we love Secure Score. It's referenced a little later in the deck. We don't have a specific plan on taking these specific things into Secure Score, but we are actively talking with Brandon about the right way to do that.
Okay, so we have an inventory of some things in our tenant that we care about.
Yep.
And don't underestimate other things that you can get information out of your tenant. A journal mailbox, right? Journal rules, very interesting thing to look at. There's other ways to get data out of your tenant. But back to the demo. We ran the baseline again, and if we go back to Outlook, we can see that we've gotten some new emails since the last time we ran it, and we see that there's no changes. Okay, so the code works, and we haven't seen any red PowerShell yet. So,
Okay.
Mark, go ahead. Back to you.
Okay. So there we go. So while I talk, Mike is attacking the tenant. So some of the attacks that we worry about, and we've kind of talked a little bit through this, but some of the scenarios that we really worry about that have the highest risk, the highest impact potentially on your organization, really fall into two different categories. Is the bulk data loss. What are all the ways in which I can lose a lot of data? And so they steal the credentials of the admins. They ultimately have direct or indirect control of all the data in there. Targeted VIP accounts, they get access straight to that high value data for those high value accounts. Transport rules. Everybody here know what a transport rule is? Okay, how many people don't know what a transport rule is? Okay, we got a couple folks. Think of it like the Outlook rules for your inbox, but that they happen on an overall Exchange organization basis. So that's a way that an adversary could send a copy of every email to or from the CEO to themselves. So it becomes a universal way of stealing data. So we want to keep an eye on those. We want to be keeping an eye on permissions and delegation, as we discussed in the last demo, and all the variants of that. How many folks here think that an e-discovery role might be a good way for an attacker to get data? E-discovery people can really take a good look at just about every piece of data in the tenant. And so that's absolutely one of those things that we worry about and think about, is if someone compromises an account that has authorized e-discovery access, they can steal data. So that's another one that sort of surprises people that they don't think of as a traditional admin. And then, of course, the attacker impersonating the insider. This is the thing where someone sends email as a CEO to authorize a wire transfer over email or something like that. So that's an area of concern. Are we attacked?
Yes, we have been attacked.
We have been attacked. We don't know this. So shh.
Okay. So let's just imagine that our script runs every hour, every day. Let's go back.
Bring you up.
And we're going to rerun it. It's that time of the day again.
Mike loves typing a password, by the way.
Soon to be replaced with MFA.
Uh-oh,
Oh,
red.
shit. I don't know what I changed in the script, but don't save it. Reopen it.
So now all of you can raise your hand of having seen a demo have trouble today.
Oh, come on. This is a failed
No,
demo?
this is not a failed demo. I said having trouble. Oh, caps lock is on. That might be her. I'm really bad at script diagnosis. You don't want to put me anywhere near PowerShell.
Okay. So the script looks a little different this time. It's pulled in the baselines. It's starting up PowerShell. It's pulling the roles. It's querying the mailboxes. And as a busy admin, I'm really not paying attention to that. I've got my inbox open, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Wait for it.
Uh-oh. So let's look at our email. I'm really glad this works. Okay, so we've got some new alerts here. Let's take a look at this admin alert. Gmark, the network security team is an admin and a tenant.
Wow. Let's go talk to them and find out who did that and why they did that. I don't remember authorizing that.
I don't remember us having a network security team.
We don't have a network security team? Oh boy. All right, we'll look into that.
Okay. Oh, look, HR created a transport rule or a journal rule. What do you think they're doing?
I don't know, but we're not supposed to remove it.
And, oh, look, John Smith, he's got access to the CEO's mailbox.
Wait, didn't we fire John Smith? Seriously, I remember walking him out. Not that we've ever seen this scenario happen in real life, no.
Okay. For those of you who are curious, if you do go to Security and Compliance Center and you run a search, you will see some alerts on some of the same actions that we saw. But it may be, it could be easy to lose some of this in the noise of things. And, Security and Compliance Center is a new thing, and people are still adapting to it. I think the alerting is still evolving a bit. So, Mark?
Yep. Thank you. So, as we take a look at the various things, and we've talked about quite a few things in that baseline that we've put in the script to kind of help you guys go down this road if this, it was something that we think you should go down and check out. But what are the other things that we can do to make sure that the administrative control of the tenant does not fall in the hands of the bad guys? How do we make sure that we're not losing that level of access to our tenant? A couple different pieces. First of all, basic hygiene stuff every security guy has known about since probably the mainframe days. I'm not quite that old. But the idea that you have to separate your admin accounts versus your user accounts. They're really two different functions. You should have a standard user account for doing standard user stuff. The thing that we found in the current threat environment is ultimately you also have to separate out the workstations for the admins from the workstations for the user tasks. Because what we've seen, even if you have two accounts, if you log onto the same machine, the adversaries that can take control of that through a phishing attack or what have you will be able to steal the credentials and or impersonate that account while it's logged in and do those administrative tasks illicitly. So you do have to have a separate operating system. A couple different configurations for this. You can have two physically separate machines that do that. That's one way of doing it. And the other option is to have it all on the same machine and use a virtual machine. Now the key is you have to make sure that you have the control flow right. Because if you have a user user host, and you put an admin VM on top of it, whoever takes over that user host can copy the VM, steal the credentials, and violate the security of it. You have to do it the opposite. You have to have an admin workstation, and then the VM or the remote desktop session or whatever it is where you put the user stuff. You cannot do it the wrong way, otherwise you defeat the purpose of it. So that's something that we've learned and we've seen in the attacks the hard way. All of that information that I just discussed of privilege access workstations, we developed a solution in our consulting practice, our cybersecurity consulting called PAW, or Privilege Access Workstation, and we essentially open source the instructions on how to build that. And so we posted out there, it's up on TechNet, anyone can build their own. If you want to bring in our guys and they can knock it out in 2 weeks with automation, we can also do that from a services standpoint. But ultimately, we want to open source that so that anyone could actually benefit from it. Multi-factor authentication, of course, which is preluding into what Mike will be talking about very shortly. Configuring that multi-factor authentication, whether it's the Office 365 kind of built-in MFA or the full Azure AD Premium with all the extra bells and whistles. Either way, you want to get that multi-factor going for your admins. A couple of caveats there that Mike will be covering in a little bit. Notice how I'm promising that you're going to do all of the hard work. Baseline and monitoring. So one form of that is the scripts that you just saw, which you guys will have access to. And the other piece is through Secure Score and looking at, obviously, same principle, two different ways of implementing it, and we are working on bringing those things together, as I mentioned earlier. And the last piece, as Mike was showing really briefly, Security and Compliance Center helps you with monitoring for various different aspects of security, and also very good to have those detective controls in addition to the preventive controls. So I'm going to take a moment and just explain a little bit when we talk about privileged access workstations. How many folks is this new for? Okay, see a few hands. So the way that we approach this is really by focusing on two different things. We see attacks that usually leverage one of three different ways to get onto a target workstation. First is very direct through internet browsing and email. This is the most frequent way that we see adversaries take over any given workstation. So that is completely blocked. Again, you might be able to do this through a virtual machine, and that's perfectly safe because it's effectively a sandbox. Second, USB attacks. We do see USB attacks, specifically around, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the Swift attacks, banking workstations. We actually saw in various different countries, nice, shiny, new, very high capacity storage USB drives that were given away and plugged in, and malware was installed. We are actually seeing those active attacks still happening. Again, that's a very high value target, but we are still seeing the USB attacks happen. So those are blocked in our admin workstation configuration. And then attacks from the enterprise environment itself. We wanted to make sure that an adversary that has control of various other workstations, other assets in the environment, cannot get in and take control of these admin workstations. So there's a number of protections and controls there, everything from firewalls all the way through separating the identities and the passwords and the like, so that that control cannot be expressed, or that control cannot be gained of these workstations from the enterprise environment.
Do you want to lock out local network monitoring and everything from the privileged workstation?
So the way we approach the various different security monitoring tools that the organization may already have with an admin workstation is we look at each one individually and what is the security benefit that it brings by having it on there, and at the same time, what is the risk that it brings by adding it to there. It's never an absolute conversation of you can't do any agents or you have to do all of them, because frequently we find that when they want to do this, they either want admin rights on the machine or they put an agent on it that's equivalent. And so ultimately you're creating a massive amount of risk because that's another way into the workstation. And you have to ask, is the security benefit of that worth the cost and the risk that you're introducing?
Thank you.
Yep, good question.
Can you go to the mic, please? Or
Cool.
that keeps us from having to repeat it.
Would you use the privileged workstation for logging into the web UI for administering Office 365, or is it for more detailed access?
Typically, we recommend the tenant admins. This is also the same exact architecture. We actually have one document on how to do one that will cover domain admins, enterprise admins, on-premise service admins, Azure, and Office 365 admins. We've included the profiles to allow you to access Office 365 and Azure so that you can configure it to only access those but not the wide open internet in those instructions. So those are pre-created. If you need to also allow access to Salesforce or some other third-party SaaS, you would have to go ahead and put all those DNS addresses and such in the controls to allow that connection. As we're security guys, we're also paranoid. We don't just want to block the entrance vectors. We want a defense in depth approach. So we have protections against software exploits through both rapid patching and some of the Windows 10 features like Control Flow Guard, and of course malware infection as well through Defender Advanced Threat Protection, which is a great detection response, and then App Locker and Device Guard and a whole bunches of stuff to make sure the admin doesn't turn off the controls because they're getting in their way or they don't know them. So a lot of those different pieces. Again, all part of the guidance that we have published.
How many use MFA today with their admin accounts? Okay. How many of you have tried to use that same account that's MFA enabled with PowerShell. Well, for those that haven't, maybe we should go through what that might look like. I'm going to go back to my, one of my original scripts, and this time I'm going to use an MFA-enabled account.
And I will actually let you show what's on your screen.
Thank you, Mark.
A little more exciting than the little city house.
Okay. And now, two things can happen in this part of the demo. One of those is you can see some red here, which either I typed the password wrong or I got an error. Trust me, could not complete authentication, okay? Even though it said there was one. Now, recently, there's been a new Azure AD PowerShell module that has been released. This is not well known. For those, some of us were following this, and there's been several versions of it. The link is provided in the deck. You'll see that this did go generally available on 8/15. So it is new, but it's been out for, I think, 9 to 12 months in some form. Let's go ahead and install this module. And for those that are familiar with using the sign-in assistant, this module doesn't require that anymore. So I'm going to install, that's worthy of applause. I'm going to install that module. We've got a really fast internet connection. And now I'm going to open up a PowerShell window. This is the same command I was using in my scripts, and if I use tab complete, that means I spelled it right. And when I execute that command, we'll see something that you may not have seen before. Okay? So let's go ahead and, of course, I've got my MFA configured, and I happen to be using the Microsoft Authenticator version of that. There's several ways to do MFA. There's text messages and phone calls, but as we know, text messages and phone calls can be spoofed.
And one quick comment on that while Mike is trying to type his password correctly. This is one of those places where we think about the cost to an attacker. MFA does have some limits when you talk about a phone, because an adversary has control of your phone and they have control of your workstation. They technically have both pieces of it, right? But isn't that a little bit harder than just getting one fish to get one workstation? You actually have to get that person's phone, and you have to get them to install stuff on that phone. So this is really where thinking through the lens of how does this increase the cost of attack really kind of helps. And MFA, you know what, it's not the magic thing that's going to guarantee safety against all stuff 100% secure. But it is something that really raises the bar and makes the attacker have to figure out what phone you have, figure out how to attack it, get you to do it, and they have to succeed twice, not just once, on 2 different platforms in 2 different ways. So really that lens of how does this increase the attacker cost is very helpful in this case. Go ahead.
Okay. So if you were watching when Mark was typing, the Azure Authenticator app prompted me. I accepted it. I did not disclose it as abuse. And I'm in Azure AD PowerShell. Okay? Cool? So let's go ahead and try the same thing with a script that uses Exchange Online PowerShell. We'll just run it again. More red. Either I typed my password wrong, or the product doesn't support MFA.
One of the 2. I see multi-factor in the red text, so I'm assuming that's what it is, right? I don't know PowerShell.
These messages are pretty hard to tell about anything. So this is something that you probably haven't heard here, and this is a pretty cool URL to know. What I'm going to show you now is an engineering preview. It is something you can try. It hasn't been widely publicized, and it's still being they're still updating it. They're still going through the development and test process. So your mileage may vary. I wouldn't necessarily say this is appropriate to use in a production environment. Okay. So if I click this link, and this is a pretty unique link. This could scare some security people because it actually installs, and on first use, it will prompt you to install, but it's kind of like a click-to-run package. So it's a little different than the PowerShell that we're kind of used to invoking from our scripts. And to access this, we have to, it gives you this usage sample here, which is pretty helpful because you can copy and paste it. And look, okay, I'm invoking Exchange Online PowerShell. Let's go back over to our phone. Let's see if it, there we go. Verify my credentials. Let's invoke the commands. So this is really cool. I mean, if you only people in this room can probably get excited about MFA, but you can now fully, administer Exchange and your tenant with an MFA-enabled account. This also works with a federated account. If I were logging in with Federation, I might get a near promptless experience with this on a domain-joined machine. Okay. So this uses the same concepts that Modern Auth does, uses the same libraries. This is just a great example of how the platform keeps changing. The last year has seen some really explosive growth in features, right? We've got the basic plumbing down, and now we keep expanding. And admin scenarios are on that burn list. They keep knocking these down, and new features are on a different list. And all the while, Azure is growing by leaps and bounds, and Office 365 is taking advantage of many advances that Azure gives Office 365 workloads for free. I expect that the other workloads, SharePoint and Skype, will follow this. It takes time. This has been something that's taken a long time. And many of you that have worked with your Microsoft teams have asked for this or agonized over why they can't use app passwords or MFA for administration. So let's go back to the slides.
Question?
So just a question. Yeah, thank you for the lovely answer to my previous question right there. Okay, so this may have been worth the entire Ignite, travel and everything. Yeah, I love that. I love it.
There's this thing called an evaluation.
Oh, really?
No, seriously. We would love to get some feedback, and positive or constructive are all welcome.
Yeah, and trust me, I love this, and I guess I speak for more here. You said that this will probably come from more workloads as well, like Skype and so on.
So that would be a really good thing to put in the feedback. We know the Exchange Online team is committed in doing the engineering on it. These are different teams that have different priorities. So again, your feedback is something that we can feed into the process. Okay. So I would encourage you to if you feel strongly about that, to add it into the comments of the session. That way we can provide access to those folks.
Yeah. Well, Azure AD and Exchange covers, I think, most of what, I'm glad you started there, let me put it that way. Okay. So would this be supported to use as of today? It's okay to just go ahead and use?
This is an engineering preview. It's subject to change.
Okay.
So I'm not endorsing its use. Feel free to use the feedback. This is not in our slides, but the user voice feedback system, people actually pay attention to that. And you can You can point to the URL and say, when is this going to be public? I think they've made a lot of progress, but I don't know if they have it on the roadmap or have a disclosure, sort of a broad disclosure strategy. Because this is one of those things that's actually kind of geeky, right? If you think about the cross-section of Office 365 tenants and customers, while very large majority are enterprise customers that really care about security, there's also 5-person real estate firms that
It's not the kind of thing we'd advertise in an airport, so it's not quite that type of feature, although it is valuable, we know, to you and to a number of folks. So again, one of the ways you can provide feedback is through that. But again, it's an engineering preview, so it's officially something that would be one of those test extensively before you use it in production sort of caveats. And it is, it's a preview. It is not a general availability, so kind of keep that in mind.
Also, this may or may not work against different types of Exchange Online instances. This may not work, for example, in China. This may not work. I haven't tested it in other regions. I do know specifically that there's some very special purpose environments that we have that this doesn't work in. But again, that's part of it being where it's at in the development process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Keep going, with that. Love it.
Cool. Thank you. Yep. And so the last couple of pieces we want to cover is just a couple of key references before we go fully to questions. I mean, you can queue up for just a few minutes there. The first is the secure score. It is 9:15, by the way, Brandon, that you're speaking tomorrow. So BRK 2166, definitely check it out tomorrow morning. Azure AD PowerShell, those 2 links, they're there in the deck. You can download them. They're also in the recording, obviously, as well. Office 365 security capabilities. This is the one that we zoomed in on before. We were focusing on that particular scenario. This is the full thing. So in each of those scenarios, there's about 8 or 10, I'd guess, cards that are associated with each of those that talk about a key feature that supports your initiative, roughly ordered from left to right in terms of the things that you would generally want to do first or might be the quickest to do. It's not super prescriptive in that way, but it is roughly laid out in that way. So a great resource to check out, that's that O365 security capabilities link there at the bottom. Very well worth checking out to kind of see how those are organized. And then just from a strategic standpoint, as people move to the cloud, how we think about it, kind of expanding on that blue and that gray chart that I had up earlier, really expanding that into a security strategy and all the things that you need to think about, or that we would recommend you think about as you build your strategy. That poster is, it's actually 5 or 6 different pages, I want to say, 5 pages, that expand on all the various different aspects of going to the cloud and being secure with it. And that's just AKMS Secure Customer. So that's a great resource. And we also recorded, based on that framework that we put together in that poster, a 4-hour course on cloud security and how to think about it from a strategic standpoint and how to integrate it in your thinking. And so there's a full Microsoft Virtual Academy course on that. That's roughly 4 hours total, about 8 modules. And then there's a number of additional sessions that, given that we're on day 4, maybe recordings by this point, that we feel like you should also check out that cover some of the topics that we've talked about in this session.
A couple call outs there.
Go for it.
GSO6 is really a great session by Brad Anderson. If you weren't able to see that, normally sometimes general sessions are kind of weird, but he told a great story, and he also introduced the security intelligence graph and the way that we're using sensor data to protect you. We strongly believe that your use of Azure Identity is going to make you more secure than you are on premise, right? We have more listening nodes and more data understanding behaviors and big data analysis on that. And Brad goes into some of that. Also, which is the other, Brandon, which is your other session on the stories you're going to tell about?
CXO's top 5 cloud concerns in the middle. BRK 1016.
Yeah, right there in the middle. Address
1016, Brandon's going to tell some great stories about what he's seen from within the product team about attacks. And those can be very interesting stories to listen to. So if you can be here tomorrow for that, I'd encourage you to try to do that.
And the one comment I'd add on what you're saying in the general session, when people ask me, hey, is this threat detection capability going to be offered on premise, whether it's our managed threat detection service or whatever it happens to be, my answer to them is the future of threat detection is the cloud. You cannot keep up with all the different attacks in a disconnected state. Because as we discover attacks in any of our products, whether it's our incident response team investigating on site or the product finds it or our internal hunter teams find it, whatever, we feed that into that intelligent security graph, and then it goes out and is protecting everyone that's consuming off of that graph data. And so that allows us to keep up with the attackers at real time. And so when you think about threat detection, it will be harder and harder to do threat detection without having that intelligence that's integrated through the cloud. So that's just one thing to kind of keep in mind as you're thinking through these threats, is the future of threat detection really is the cloud. And with that, we'll go ahead and just take questions until they boot us off the stage. We really thank you very much for your time and attention, and thank you.
So what is your recommendation for securing accounts like that have a user administrator role where you're scheduling PowerShell tasks? Because obviously you can't use MFA with them because nobody is actually there to type in the code or to verify.
So for automated tasks, are you talking specifically for Office 365?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the question was multi-factor, what is our recommendation for multi-factor for accounts that do such as a scheduled task or a scripted task?
It's a really great question.
That means we don't have a good answer. No, we don't have a specific MFA answer on that.
I do have a good answer.
Oh, you
actually,
do?
I do.
Defer,
I'm going to come to your rescue right now.
Thank you.
So one way to do that is to just deprecate the use of service accounts altogether. Register your automation as an application in Azure Active Directory. Require that it basically needs specific claims to interact with the service, and then have an admin grant consent for that app to interact with your PowerShell interfaces with that particular thing. And there's a secret that's contained. It can either be a string or a cert. We recommend a cert. It's more secure. And then you just have to grant that app, wherever that PowerShell script is running, access to that cert, and then it is only able to do the specific thing that you want it to do. So there's no more admin account to maintain. All the authentication is granted. It's a standard OAuth flow, so it's like a normal MFA modern auth token flow, but it's like a service-to-service application. I just made it up. No, it is documented. It is documented. If you look up service-to-service OAuth flow, there'll be a bunch of links in there. It's complicated, but it does allow you to deprecate the use of admin accounts for that and really get right with the MFA stuff.
So service-to-service.
Yeah, as you saw earlier, I said that if you were using a federated account and you use some of these MFA PowerShell versions, you will get a promptless logon experience on a domain joined machine for that. That isn't necessarily the answer, but it speaks to how the OAuth integration works with that. Maybe that's a great thing for next year.
I think we need to explore that. Sir?
Just real quick, where's the scripts? Where are they going to be published?
They're actually in the appendix slides of this deck, and then we're also working on getting a download link for them independently so that folks can get them on a normal basis without having to know it was presented at Ignite. So
See?
you got them
Thank
there.
you.
They're in the deck.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for this presentation. It's been real helpful.
Cool.
Question, the Azure DNS outage a few weeks ago, it was mitigated pretty quickly, but was that the result of an attack?
I don't know. I honestly have no idea. And I'm not doing the no comment, your honor thing. I really honestly don't know. But I mean, we can talk and see if we can follow up, but I have no idea.
I was doing my demos all week. I don't remember an outage
It was
impacting.
It was about 2 weeks ago. It didn't affect everybody, but it was,
Okay.
there was an Azure DNS outage that, if I remember right, was mitigated in a couple hours, but it affected other services because it was DNS. So,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah.
Thanks.
Didn't North Korea do something with their root DNS too last couple weeks ago?
I don't know. Question over there?
Yeah, a quick question about mailbox audit logging. Do you guys have any recommendations as far as what we can have turned on for those, which you might recommend? I've just seen a couple of warnings on TechNet. You know, warning if you turn on too many of these functions, it could cause a large load, may cause a lot of logs to be stored inside the user's mailbox. Do you guys have any tips for, you know, general what you should enable for each user's mailbox in your tenant?
Well, when you go to the new Security and Compliance Center, you have to turn it on.
Gotcha.
And it turns it on for everything. That's my understanding. I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in on that. Yeah, there was concerns about that in the past, but I haven't seen no guidance that warns customers about doing that to their mailboxes. Is there a potential impact on mailbox performance? Yes. Is it something that we anticipate? You know, probably, right? Which isn't a great answer to your question.
And we can talk more off to the side of the stage. Thank you guys very much and really appreciate it.